So this is the third and final video on marks of Christians and Christian churches. And with Christian churches, it's really not that hard to find out which ones are biblical and which ones are not. And from my experience from having gone into dozens of churches all across America, the main defining characteristics, it takes about 20 minutes to figure out which churches are godly and which ones are not. So a lot of people, they define if it's a good church if they feel good in that church. But what that means is you have people who largely have never studied the Bible at all. And you walk into a church and you're going to think that this place is following God because they made you feel good about yourself. You know who else makes you feel good about yourself? Is the devil. He's a master at it. He'll tell you anything you want. He'll give you anything you want to get you to do what he wants you to do. So you have to be wary of these churches. Like I would say the vast majority of today's Christians, they are in their churches because their churches make them feel good about themselves with the choices that they make. But if you get a bunch of apathetic people with bad habits together, they all make each other feel good about each other. Churches were not designed to be gigantic get-along gangs. You know, just because people like you and make you feel good about yourself, that is not what a church is. I've heard one of the best definitions of what a preacher is a preacher disturbs the comfortable and comforts the disturbed. And that's what too few teachers in churches do these days. So one of the very first primary things, since we're having to deal with a huge problem with feminism, which is a threat to the fundamental building block of churches and nations, which is marriage, you have to find out, is feminism in your church? So how do you know if feminism is in your church or not? It's very easy. 1 Timothy 2 is very clear. Women are to stay silent in the churches. Now, that doesn't mean they can't sing. They could sing songs. It doesn't mean they can't pray. They could ask for prayers. But when it comes to sharing in public instruction, and especially teaching men, that is when women need to be silent. We're told in 1 Corinthians 14 that women are to ask their husbands if they have a question at home. And if you're a single woman, you just don't talk. If you want to get married, you want a male representative, go get married. Find a man who's a preacher or something. But the entire purpose of this was that women are far more vulnerable and susceptible to being deceived. It's their emotional nature. That's why you see your propaganda from your newspaper, radios, televisions, it's almost all universally aimed at women. Republicans target women, Democrats target women, because once you've got women, you largely have children and men to go along with it. It's a very smart strategy. Most men don't like arguing with their wives. So if their wives are firmly convinced of something, men are just not really liking to constantly clash with a woman. And when a woman believes something, and women, why do women get married? Most of them get married because they want to improve their lifestyle. I'm sorry to say it, but most of the times it's materially. And the quickest way for a woman to improve her lifestyle, there's absolutely nothing like it. A woman could go from having a $400 credit score or a 400 credit score with $30,000 of debt to being financially stable with an 800 credit score overnight by marrying a man. There's nothing else she could do that for her. So that's what most women are looking for. They want a man to financially make them secure. That's the wrong outlook, and this is why men should have a much bigger role in a lot of women's decisions in choosing spouses, because women not only often make the wrong decisions in spouses, but they often, when they're in a relationship, will leave the relationship for no real good reason. We should not have divorce, no-fault divorce. That came along with Rainbow Ronnie in 1969. That was a disaster. 80% of your marriages right now are being initiated by women. So when you walk into a church, if you see like a woman preacher, a woman pastor, a woman raising her hand and sharing, a woman taking a leadership role at all, you know that church is not a biblical church, and you need to find a new church or leave and go home. Don't go there. There is no salvation in these churches. I grew up in one of these churches. And the women who raised me as a child, I'm very grateful. They were wonderful women. They did a wonderful job taking care of me, gave me many biblical lessons. But unfortunately, all of that was spoiled because they insist on trying to be equal with men and raising their hands in Bible classes. It's like God did not give you the capacity to be teaching men. And it's so embarrassing because the women, they're speaking in these classes, and men are sitting in these classes who have intellects. The women's intellect is about a fraction of the men's intellect. And men are sitting here having to listen to women who, no doubt, women are amiable, vivacious, charming, and especially if the woman's attractive and, she's of a good nature. It doesn't even matter if she's physically attractive. If she's a good natured, you never tire of listening to them. But this is chatter, and this is not what the church was designed to do. It's not there to listen to women and their grasp of history and the Bible, which not on average is far less than men. Pound for pound, when it comes to the intellect, men and women are different. We have different brains. We have different bodies. It's not that one's superior and one's inferior. It's just that God designed different roles for us. He even says in the Bible in Corinthians, Paul says that men were not designed for the women. Women were designed for the men. We are not here to please women. This whole idea that, happy wife, happy life, that's one of the biggest myths. But let's continue. We got about 3 minutes left. So another mark of a church is, do they teach on sin? Churches, if they don't teach against sins like drugs, fornication, adultery, and have church discipline for public sins like fornication, adultery, drug abuse, with mercy. Sometimes, people won't get church discipline because they're new and they don't know any better. But if they don't have this church discipline, you don't really have love. Love involves correction. In Hebrews 12, we're told that God corrects those whom he loves. Those who he does not correct are bastards. So with no church discipline, that's not a biblical church. The other thing is, this is a key thing, when you walk into that church, if there's not a lot of children and there's a lot of young couples, there's probably a problem with birth control. So if you're a Christian and you are married and you are deliberately trying not to have as many kids as you can, and you're medically capable of having children, that is a sin. And this is why the church in America, and especially the white population, is being decimated, because you got so many selfish people that are just thinking about themselves. Oh, I can't afford to have kids. The idea that you can't afford to have kids is so unscriptural, I don't even know where to start. It's such a bad perversion, and it was deliberately induced into America and the church to prevent Christians from having kids and Americans from having kids. And it's wiping the white population out. It's wiping America out. We're not going to be a nation here much longer if we keep having people getting married who are thinking about, can I afford to have kids? Can I afford to have kids? Life has a price tag. If you fall in the store and you break your arm, you could sue them for like $2 million. If your arm is worth $2 million, what is a life worth? And you're worried about, can I afford to have kids? Yet this is a common consideration. There are tens of millions of men and women in America who think to themselves and are actively not having kids because they think they can't afford to have kids, which is such a lack of faith. And you can't be a Christian if you don't have faith. If you don't believe in God and you don't believe in his promises and you don't believe in his first commandment was not, thou shalt have no other gods before me. His first commandment was, be fruitful and multiply. So if you walk into a church and you see a lot of young couples and you find out they're not teaching against birth control, then that church is not biblical and you need to find another one. Don't go to those churches. Those churches are dying. They're literally killing themselves off. You could go spreading the gospel all over, but you can't. The very first tenet of the gospel is to obey God yourself. You can't spread God's word to other people when you're not obeying God yourself. And the very first command he gave to married couples was to be fruitful and multiply. So if you're actively trying not to have children and then you want to go spread the gospel to other people, I have news for you. You are a hypocrite. You're not spreading the gospel to anyone because you're setting a terrible example yourself. How are you going to tell other people to have a lot of children when you're not doing it yourself? And the vast majority of men and women right now are unfit for marriage because men are into a lot of these vices, and women, they will not obey their husbands and they will not have a lot of children. So if you're a woman and you think that way, you're not fit to marry. And if you're a man and you're not looking for a wife to marry who will obey you and have a lot of children, you aren't fit to marry. So that's 90% of your couples right now are unfit for marriage. Another huge problem. But I think I've pretty much exhausted it. If this message sounds critical and negative, it's actually not. It's very positive, because halfway to changing for the better is acknowledging one is wrong and addressing these issues. Upwards and onwards, per ardua ad astra, through difficulties to the stars. Ciao.